was the mid-2000s, and I found myself in a very awkward situation. I was living in London at the time and working in London. I was hired as a researcher there at a university, and as you can see by this slide, this very iconic slide of London, the weather can change at a moment's notice. We'll get to that in a moment. I was slated to pick up a visitor at an airport. This is me actually at my workplace taking a photo of the runway. So this airport was very close to where I worked. It was a very early flight. I was exhausted. I had worked really late the night before, and quite frankly, I am not a morning person at all. So I cobble myself together. I get to this airport on this really early, I get to the airport, there was a really early flight coming in, and I decide that I'm going to be comfortable. So I don my pink tracksuit. Yes, this was the mid-2000s, please don't judge me. There I am in half my tracksuit, but I really had the full getup on that day. I also was toting my BlackBerry. Again, it's the mid-2000s, please do not judge me. I loved that little device. And I knew that I'd be there for a little while so I could write some emails while I was waiting for my visitor. This is the airport, and you can see it's a small business-oriented airport. Now, when I arrived at the airport, it was a lovely day, but the fog had set in very, very quickly. So many of these flights originated, they left their source airports, but then they couldn't land at this particular airport anymore because of the fog. So here I am, completely exhausted, and I need to try to keep myself awake. I'm there longer than I had planned. So I sit down, I start falling asleep, I get up, and I decide that I'm going to go to the bookstore. Walk around, I sit back down again. I get up and I go to the information desk. And I ask for information on the flights. Remember, this is not the era of the full smartphones, and I didn't have information at my fingertips. So I just kept getting up and asking, sitting back down, and I repeated this for a while until I said, enough. I am tired, I need to get some fresh air. So I walk outside to be greeted by this. One officer, then another officer, and suddenly I was surrounded by many members of London Metropolitan Police. Of course, I was scared, I was angry. I mean, there's a whole airport of people who are belligerently angry that they couldn't get on a flight, and I have a bunch of police officers surrounding little 5-foot me in a pink tracksuit. They continue to ask me questions. Who are you? Why are you here? And I try to tell them, I'm here to pick up a visitor. And I'm showing them where I work. See across the Thames, see across the docks. That is where I work. I was hired as a researcher. They weren't interested in that information. Apparently, somebody at the airport had called and reported me as a person of interest. They thought I was a terrorist. And that was the vision that they had of me. And so I wasn't able to be released by the police until my visitor actually showed up. And he was able to explain why I was there, who I was. It probably helped that he was male, he was taller than me, and he had a little lighter skin color than I did. Let me talk about what I do for a living. I study human resources management, and for those of you, well, all of you are probably familiar with some aspect of human resources if you've ever held a job. Human resources management looks at attracting talent, right, into organizations, maximizing that talent to match organizational needs, and then once there's no longer a fit, facilitating their exit. I also analyze human resources management in the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. You've probably heard that terminology before as well, as we are now talking about this so much, particularly in our organizations. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is about representation, and we're representing the wider population of diverse beings and making sure that they have a voice and thrive in organizations. As you probably know, we're not doing very well in that regard, right? And of course, this is why we're throwing money at diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're hiring all sorts of leaders. It's because we're not doing a good job of this. Here's just some statistics, right? Applicants with disabilities need to send out 60% more applications than those without disabilities to get a job. If you are an ethnic minority applicant, you have to send out 60% more applications to just get a callback, just to be seen twice, compared to those individuals who don't identify as a minority. And this is, again, just recent info, and there's tons more research to show that we are not very diverse and representative in our organizations. So what are we doing to fix this, right? Human resources, well, there are a number of things we can do to try and incorporate more people into our organizations. And one of the suggestions is this notion of blind hiring. Blind hiring meaning that if we can strip away a lot of the identity characteristics of people who apply to organizations, then perhaps bias will not enter the decision-making of hiring managers. Right? We're really worried about bias. And we even have software that can do this, strip names, strip identities from job applications. That way, again, when hiring managers look at applicants, they only see the knowledge, skills, abilities, experiences, and so on that match job and organizational needs. If you've been a job applicant, you've probably been told as well, minimize what you put on your resumes, on your application forms, that hint at any kind of identity, gender, race, ethnicities, because hiring managers might have a biased opinion of you that doesn't relate to the job. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute. What are we saying? First of all, we're saying, job applicants, sanitize yourselves. Take away all of the things that make you unique in your general makeup, and just present your knowledge, skills, and abilities. That's all organizations want to see. And furthermore, what else are we saying? We're saying, hiring managers, you're irresponsible. We don't trust you with information, so we have to hide it from you. Is this the way we really want to see people in our organizations? Do we really want to promote this notion? So it is in this regard that human resources management and diversity, equity, and inclusion are at odds with one another. These goals clash. And in fact, diversity, equity, and inclusion are seen as a problem to fix, as a chore. Last time I checked, I wasn't a problem to fix. Let me now tell you a little bit more about myself. I am an immigrant. I'm an immigrant to the United States. But I was born in Canada, so I am not coming from very far, but it does mean that I had to learn a lot about US culture in order to thrive personally and professionally, because US employment law is much different than Canadian employment law. As you can tell, I haven't had the best experiences at borders. I've had my car searched many, many times at land crossings, and quite frankly, we never find anything. I've had a lot of full body searches at airports. That's maybe not uncommon, but when you have that regularly and the person you're traveling with does not, it raises an eyebrow. I have also been the person standing in line, the only person where someone has stared at me for 20 minutes, then walked over, declared that they needed to do a random search, and they needed to search my luggage right there and then in front of everybody while they take my passport away to examine it. And this didn't happen to a single other person in that line. So I guess to many people, I'm not American, I'm not Canadian, my passport actually doesn't matter. They're looking for something based on other identity characteristics. My parents are also immigrants, as you've probably figured out, immigrants to Canada. And they came to Canada, went to Canada a long, long time ago, had me, had my brothers and sisters, and we tend to be mistaken. People think that we come from India or we come from the Middle East. In fact, my parents come from a country in South America a very poor country, one of the poorest in South America, one of the poorest in the Western Hemisphere, and is culturally tied to the West Indies. But people are more familiar with India in the Middle East, and that tends to get assigned to us, whether we are or not. Lastly, let's talk about my age, or maybe we shouldn't talk about my age. We don't talk about age, right? I am often perceived as younger than I am. I'm actually quite old. It is not uncommon for me to hand out diplomas at our commencement here at the college, walk out of commencement, and parents start congratulating me on graduating with an undergraduate degree. While it's flattering, there's a dark side to that. It means that people erase or don't see my 15, 20, 30 years of experience, of knowledge, of maturity, right? So people routinely dismiss what I say. They refute what I say. They run around behind my back checking to see if I've done the work. And it kind of diminishes me. Right? So why am I telling you all of these things? I'm sort of an immigrant twice. I haven't had the benefit of social and cultural capital through much of my life. Tried to learn my best to assimilate, to learn the ways of the United States, of Canada, and all of the places that I've lived and worked. And yet, people still reduce me down to who they see and who they think I am. And that is likely what happened that day at London City Airport. So, bringing us back to the organization, the personal space, we tend to see people for parts. We see people for component parts that are either valuable to us, meaningful to us, or helps us with a narrative. In organizations, it's even worse. You're told to strip yourself of your identity and just present the bits that the organization wants to exploit for themselves. Organizations inevitably become a proverbial chop shop. And we need to stop looking at people as their component parts and see people as whole beings. Because once you get into the organization and your DEI employees are saying, now we'd like you to express yourself. Well, guess what? It's not there. The same hiring manager that we were worried about making an erroneous judgment is standing in front of us. Why would I want to express myself? Right? I have that fear, and quite frankly, I've learned so hard to learn this capital and to assimilate that I've even forgotten parts of myself. So, a couple of takeaways. First of all, the primary takeaway is that we need to reframe the way that we look at people. We need to observe people with a holistic authenticity. Recognize that people are whole beings. Their identities can't and shouldn't be scrubbed to make other people uncomfortable. Right? And here's the thing, we all need to do this. We all need to look at everybody and realize that these identities are not sources of negative judgment, but that they are valuable and they make up our entire identity. And we need to be allowed to express this in a very authentic manner as well. Right? I understand that we have some boundaries, we have professional spaces that we need to keep in mind, but to tell us to scrub ourselves and remove our identities is really, it's dismissive, it's reductionist, and it takes away from who we are. And so it's not my job to make myself lesser and smaller if I want to get into your organization because hiring managers and decision makers and leaders are irresponsible with information. Quite frankly, it's the responsibility of managers, leaders, and decision makers to learn to look at people with that lens, right? And learn to be responsible. When you learn that someone is female and they have a darker skin color and they come from a particular race, that is not a place to inject bias. We take that all in, we appreciate it, and quite frankly, I can't get rid of a lot of my identity factors. So I want you to look at me as the whole person, and now let's talk about what I can bring to the organization. The responsibility is on the decision makers, not on us. The second thing that I want to impress upon you is that you, me, You are whole. You are complete. You are worthy. You are valued. And you have earned your place. And nobody should tell you that you are none of these things. Nobody should diminish you and your identity. One of the quotes I like to live by is by a poet called Rupi Kaur. And she says, what is the greatest lesson a woman can learn? That since day one, she's already had everything she needs within herself. It's the world that convinced her that she did not. I am a woman. I am an immigrant. I am short. I am petite. I have a darker skin color. And I don't want to erase any of that. I want you to look at that and value that, even if I'm wearing a pink tracksuit, which you can still get, by the way. This is a current listing. Thank you very much.